So, Preston, I wanted to talk to you about this article I saw recently from CBR.com, which stands for Comic Book Resources, and it's titled "The 10 Harsh Realities of Rewatching Game of Thrones." Game of Thrones used to be the most
Carmine,
popular.
by the way, he calls me up and he's like he tells me about this article and I'm like, okay, I'll go read it, and he's like, no, don't read it. I want your fresh shocked opinion about everything. I was like, okay, all right. So
I
I
mean,
know nothing about this going in.
it's always better like when I can blindside you with certain things. So,
Okay, yeah,
but
but yeah, that's where I am.
by Angelo Delos Trinos, Game of Thrones used to be the most popular fantasy series of all time. Now it's remembered for its wasted potential, and rewatching it doesn't help. Yes,
Mm.
I kind of agree with that. Excuse me, because rewatching it, the end kind of sucks, and it's a train wreck you know is gonna go down, but not yet, and you're kind of enjoying
Yeah,
the first few seasons, which I've seen multiple times. I've seen seasons 1 up to 5 multiple times.
yeah, yeah.
So, um,
I think there's certainly that aspect of when you're first watching it, you kind of say, okay, well, this is going someplace. That character did something weird because it's gonna go someplace. Um, but it doesn't. So we'll
it's
see.
funny. It's
Okay.
funny you say that because, as the guy said here, this can be mostly blamed on a controversial and botched final season, but arguably these problems were there since the beginning. Rewatching HBO's dark fantasy today only makes this harsh reality more obvious for all to see. Some of the stuff on
Hmm.
this list, there's 10. Some of them I agree
Okay.
with. Some of them I don't agree with.
Right.
Actually,
Like some people will give examples of like Talisa as like, anything where it's not from the book, it's kind of a disaster,
the super fans.
Yeah. So, we'll see. I don't want to like jump in and guess what this list is before it's here. But okay, let's hear it.
Well, like I said, some of them I agree with, some of them I don't, and I think this is one
Okay.
of the ones I don't agree with. The series peaked at the Red Wedding. Game of Thrones has
Hmm.
countless memorable moments, but one of the most infamous is Season three's Red Wedding. Here, the heroic Starks were ruthlessly slaughtered by the traitorous Boltons and Freys. The massacre sent shockwaves across the world and was praised for its daring brutality. However, this was as good as the series would ever get. Time and time again, the series tried in vain to top the Red Wedding with an even bigger display of violence, as in the Great Sept Explosion. The Red Wedding's success trapped the series in a loop as it was stuck trying desperately to recreate the moment that cemented Game of Thrones' unforgiving reputation instead of pushing the series forward. I kind of disagree with this.
Yeah, I disagree that it was the Red Wedding. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
first of all, I think that Game of Thrones peak is season one. I mean,
What?
seasons.
Wait a minute.
Right. No, I mean seasons two and three are great. I have no like general problem with seasons two and three,
Hmm.
but let's be honest, like they're not better than season one.
No, season
Like,
one, I think, is the gold standard for any book to
yeah,
show or movie adaptation ever.
yeah. I mean, you just can't beat it. Not that the Red Wedding, it was a great moment, but it didn't the everything else not comparing to the Red Wedding is not the Red Wedding's fault. It's the fact that like you're past book material, and so nothing's going to shock you. Like they didn't feel like any of the characters could be killed, so they all had plot armor.
Hmm.
You know, like if there was some shocking moment in the middle of season five where Jamie or Arya, just dies, we'd all be, pretty blindsided. But that never happened.
See, I don't know.
Hmm.
I think season five is when Game of Thrones really peaked because, and I understand a lot of people like to give season five a lot of flack because the Sand Snakes and yeah, sure, fine,
Yeah, yeah.
whatever. But that aside, there's a lot of Game of Thrones esque moments, a lot of memorable moments in season five that
Hmm.
people just keep forgetting happened. Like the Night's Watch betrayal of Jon Snow, Cersei's Walk of Shame, Shireen's burning is one of those insane things.
Yeah.
Stannis' last stand for me. The Hard Home episode, Kill the Boy and Let the Man Be Born. There's a lot of really great
Hmm.
moments that for some reason people keep forgetting happened in season five, and all they remember is bad pussy, bad pussy, bad pussy.
Well, right. I still think the first three seasons are really great, and season
Yeah.
four is pretty good.
Hmm.
Like I still believe that. Um, but I do think the plot armor was a problem. Just think about John dying in the show and how everyone, like, no one thought he was dead. Like, no one. Everybody's just like, well, he's not dead.
To be fair, we like because we read the books, we look at it from like a book reader perspective. But I know a lot of fans who did not read the books thought he was truly gone.
All right. All right. I mean, this was a debate among even book fans for a long time, whether John was truly gone.
He could still be
Man.
gone. You don't know. George could pull a fast one.
No, I mean, I mean, if he ever writes anymore, but
Oof.
I would like, I think it might be a better story if John is gone, or at least never a point of view character again. But I don't know. I mean, I suppose
That's a good
there
one,
has to be
actually.
people out there. There has to be people out there that believe that John died in that finale. But I just saw so much stuff that's just like, no, John's not dead, and that's because the show made John into more of the protagonist than the book does.
The
I
bathroom
mean,
sign.
yeah, absolutely.
Gotta
But
have
also
it.
just cover art. You open up the DVDs and it's John on one side and Danny on the other, and
Mhm.
how that's portrayed. Um, it was not presented as an ensemble. It's presented as like a John and Danny story, right?
110%. And you brought up a very great point for the books. And if when you do your, John chapter or whoever is over there on the wall, um, even if he does get resurrected, he's no longer a point of view character because
Yeah,
he died. I like that. I
right.
like that little thing. That's gone. Um,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think that might be the case just because fitting all of the point of view chapters into the Winds of Winter is really, really difficult. And Melisandre was introduced in A Dance with Dragons kind of needlessly because she's in a chapter in which John is in half of the chapter. So that, like, John, it could have been from John's perspective there anyway. The only thing that we got out of it was a little bit of like doubt about Melisandre's magic abilities, like grounding her, making her into more of a charlatan.
mhm.
That was the only benefit of kind of having the Melisandre perspective. But it could have been done without giving her perspective. But it was sort of like warming us up to the idea that in the next book, at the wall, the perspective is going to be Melisandre. It's not going to be John. And so a lot of people think that, maybe John, at least in the Winds of Winter, will not be a perspective. But
Oh, by the way, real quick, just so the audience is aware, I don't know if you guys can hear this, but if you hear any purring in the background, I promise that's not me. That is my cat who came in here. And
or your harem.
don't, oh, dude, don't even start with that one. Number nine. This is actually something I've argued for way back when I started my channel. And started doing Thrones content, and I argued in favor and in agreement with this point. Number nine. The excessive sex and violence amounted to nothing. Extreme sex and violence were practically Game of Thrones' calling card, so much so that the gratuitous nudity and murder happened at least once in every episode. The show's defenders claim that these were necessary for the story's deconstructive goals and themes, but the series' conclusive big picture says otherwise. Brutal deaths and injuries were only really there for shock value's sake, while the series never really bothered to properly analyze the sexual violence on display. Instead, it portrayed the assaults as necessary for its female characters' development and toughening. In hindsight, Game of Thrones had a very immature understanding of sex and violence. So I kind of agree with this, but I
Yeah, I
also
mean,
kind of
yeah.
disagree with it. Like for certain characters, it's appropriate. Like
Mm,
for Tyrion and Theon. And I guess you could argue for Dany in the first season.
yeah.
I don't see the need for Dany to have any more sex or nude scenes after season one. It's kind of
Yeah, no, I mean,
pointless.
I have to agree with it, even though I know that D&D were smart enough to know that like they're smart enough to know that the message of A Song of Ice and Fire is anti-war and anti-violence fundamentally. Um, but they just somehow didn't execute any of that. Like you kind of get to the point at the end where uh, the Hound says to Arya that you can't follow me because I'm not someone to look up to. Like vengeance is not the way. and then he goes off and has this epic battle. Like, like they'll put in the message and then they undermine that message consistently, or that, like, Danny's moments of violence where we're supposed to be cheering her on, they kind of go shame, shame at the end with us. So it's not that they weren't aware that of what they were supposed to be doing, but they didn't execute it well. Because I do agree that in the end it was shock, and it didn't provide any sort of, like, moral lesson for the show. So, because the moral lesson at the end is really great stories bind us together. Like, right? Like that's the story in the end, right? Not all of this war was pointless and useless and horrible. Like that, right? That should have been the message, but the message in the end is stories bind us. So
seasons of characters walking through the Riverlands, seeing like the ravaged like countryside, and no, that's not. There's nothing.
I mean, especially I would say Arya is the the worst aspect of that. Like she is in the most gruesome, violent scenes of the whole show, and she never learns her lesson. She never grows. She doesn't. We don't see the negative aspects of that on her. In the end, she goes off to have more adventures. Even though she participated in some of them she participated in the most gruesome things. Like, right? Like Walder Frey's pies is the most gruesome thing that happened in the show, right? I mean, burning of Shireen is probably number 2, but Frey pies is number 1.
Yeah, she made Walder Frey eat what, his own son?
She forced him to eat his own sons, right? Like there's nothing more disturbing. I mean, Stannis burning his own daughter is next, but like it's what lesson did we learn from Arya doing that?
Don't fuck
Nothing.
with the Starks?
I guess.
I disagree about the violence part, simply because medieval times is a very violent place. So
sure.
Okay. But the sex scenes, a lot of them were incredibly unnecessary, unless it was like Tyrion season 1, Dany season 1, Theon in seasons 1 and 2. Okay, I'll give you that. But there was a scene I recall that was incredibly unnecessary. The scene is Littlefinger is watching a man receive a blowjob from a sex worker, and then the sex worker comes out of the room with cum dripping on her chin, and then proceeds to French another guy. I don't.
Yeah, I do remember that. You remember? What's the point?
What's the point? And there's also a scene where Littlefinger in season 1, where Littlefinger is watching a lesbian scene between Roz and someone else, and he's giving his whole backstory, kinda, of how he wants Catelyn for himself. That was unnecessary. Like, there's just it is excessive, and I think the writers were on a podcast years ago where they even admitted that sometimes they write these in there just to see these actors and actresses in these positions.
Sure. I mean, I would say, I'm trying to think, because you are right. Like, the Theon Roz sex stuff, the only purpose was to give Theon screen time during season 1. It didn't lead anywhere. Like, him having a relationship with Roz had no effect on the plot.
But it's also to show him as like kind of like not really a playboy, but like how the scene with him and Roz, and then later on with him and Osha, where he's not really having sex because he's a charismatic guy who gets it easy. He's just, kind of a shallow douchebag type of guy who has really nothing really going for him other than he's like,
yeah, I guess so. And they're establishing Tyrion one way, and then Dany and Drogo's sexual relationship is a relevant plot point because it's specifically how she gains control over him. And I would argue later on, Loras and Olivar's sex scenes are relevant to the plot. But I'm trying to think anyone else's. You know, like for instance, there's a random scene in which they're preparing for the Blackwater, and so the Hound and Braun go to the whorehouse and are
No,
surrounded
no,
by naked
actually,
women.
the Hound comes in at the tavern while there's a
Yeah,
sex worker on Braun's lap.
right. And you think, oh, they're gonna fight, and then they don't fight. But then you're
Right.
like, well, what was the point of that? Just so we could see some naked women, you know? But yeah, no, you're right that they don't really lead nothing. None of it leads anywhere. Like most of these sex scenes.
Like, you don't have to have, and I appreciate these because Anna Chaplin, who played Talisa, very gorgeous. You don't have to
Hmm.
have a Rob Stark, Anna Chaplin, or Talisa sex scene. You can give us the impression. Maybe it's him. Maybe it's Rob. He's kind of like, naked from the waist up, and he's reading a letter, and you can see Talisa in the back, and the implication that they had sex. That's fine. The implications are fine, but actual full blown sex scenes, I think that's just HBO being HBO. That's what they
It
were
is
known for.
it is HBO being HBO. It's HBO's signature. Like, um yeah, you just having it there for the sake of it. But
The funny thing is, like, sex scenes at this point are just kind of whatever. Like, back in the day,
yeah,
before the internet was like really in there,
that's
eh,
the way people got nudity and
right?
got sex was through these little teasings on HBO. And like these are the days in which uh, young kids would listen to the Playboy channel through the squiggly lines. I don't know if you know what I'm talking
I
about.
don't actually, but I
Oh,
get I kind of.
so back in the day, when you got a cable box, um, they would unlock certain channels that you paid for,
Mm,
and so but when the stuff that was unlocked still had the audio, and then it would have squiggly the picture would be squiggling around,
mm.
so you couldn't see it. Well, sometimes like the squiggles um would not squiggle so much and you could sort of see something. And so, it was just kind of this like very little boy thing of like watching the Playboy channel and looking through the squiggly lines and trying to see a boobie. Like it squiggled up while listening to the audio. Like this was a yeah. I mean, this is what the world had before. And that's if you were lucky enough to even have cable, So like
That was way back when, and now you can get porn on your iWatch. So
yeah,
it's
exactly.
but no,
Yeah.
it's HBO being HBO. Theon's sex scenes, it's him thinking with his cock, and drives forward later as to who he becomes, and like Daenerys Drogo relevant, but like the scene in season 3 where Dario comes to proclaim his loyalty for Dany, and she's bathing, and she gets up, and you just see her breasts. I
Hmm.
mean, Emilia Clarke is hot. I like boobs,
Right.
but I don't feel like
Sure.
this is necessary. Uh,
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true.
especially if you're gonna go to a marine and not have like in the books. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a minute. Isn't there like a fashion style to have one breast out?
It is. It's funny that when they had that opportunity, they didn't take
They
advantage
didn't
of it.
take it. Like, so what's the
Yeah.
point?
Now, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not a prude, and I'm not shocked by sex on the screen. And if they want to put it in, it's fine as long as it doesn't take away from anything. Like I think it is kind of ridiculous that we live in a society where it's okay for children to watch violence, but it's not okay for them to watch sex. Like who cares? Like, you know, so it's not that I don't mind like having the sex and be part of the plot as long as it's part of the plot. Like what's the point if it's not? Of course, we had a lot of violence that was not part of the plot either. So
Hmm.
um, less so. It didn't feel as shoehorned, but there was definitely some violence in the show that just wasn't in the book as well, just because they wanted to throw in some violence.
It's HBO being
It's
HBO.
HBO.
Number 8, character deaths now come across as cheap gimmicks. If there's
Mm.
something more synonymous with Game of Thrones than wanton violence, it was major character deaths. The dark fantasy made a name for itself by promising not to spare anyone, and this was made clearest through Ned Stark's execution when he was a focal character. Though Ned's demise was pivotal, almost every death after it was not. What was once a truly mortifying twist became a predictable jump scare, so much so that viewers and even the show were more interested in counting down characters' death than following their personal journeys. This may have been a fun drinking game at the show's height, but it doesn't make for a good drama in a rewatch. I kind of disagree with this.
I mean, no one. I would say the reverse happened. Like there weren't any deaths. Like there weren't any deaths for a long time.
That truly
Of
mattered.
that truly mattered, of like really important, like, characters, right? Like after the death of Oberyn, who by the way never got to be an important character, because you think he's going to be an important character and then he's not. So it's not even Oberyn.
He was
So
a
it's
fan
essentially
favorite. The fan
yeah,
favorite is not does not mean important.
right. I would say the big shockers are Ned dying, Jaime losing his hand, and the Red Wedding, right? And then
I'm sure there's something else. What about Marjorie and the Tyrell clan and
I mean the Tyrell clan, but that's the like that it takes the entire Tyrell clan like blowing up at once for it to be shocking. But even I guess Marjorie grew to be a fairly large character. It's just that she's not that large of a character in the books, so we just kind of go, oh, okay. But they grew her character in the show and then killed her off. I mean, I guess Marjorie and the High Sparrow, because he did it at the same time.
High Sparrow I expected, but I did not expect
Yeah.
Marjorie or Loras. That I did not
Yeah.
expect.
Of course, Loras we hadn't seen for a while, so. But yeah, the Sept. There was the Sept, but that was like a lot of B characters and not a single A character, right? Like not had they killed
Yeah.
a single A character before before season 8,
I want to say Elena, but she is a B, maybe
Yeah.
even C character. That death was obviously she just drinks poison. It's cuts to black. But
Yeah, I
good
suppose
scene.
Barristan, but he's almost just a B character too.
I think you're right. Yeah.
So, but then you start thinking of those top tier characters, Dany and Jorah, Theon, Asha, Yara, Cersei, Jaime, Tyrion, Jon, like none of them are dying. Not even Sam, like none of them are dying. Jaime.
I don't think. See, this is where it's hard for me to like agree or disagree, and I got to remain kind of like
Yeah.
neutral on this because at the same time, the opposite can be true. Like if you
Yeah.
kill off, I don't know, if you kill off Jamie in season 6, well, now you're just killing Jamie off because you got nothing else to do, or now you're just
Yeah.
killing Jamie off for a shock or whatever. But if you don't kill off Jamie, you'll get criticized the same way. I feel like it's damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Well, I think the difference is that, when a death really is important and it changes the plot, like Ned dying has huge, huge implications. I mean,
Right.
right? It causes the Northern Independence and it causes the war to start. Even Oberyn, who is, not a major character, his death is a major ripple in that it causes the entire Dorne plot. So you can say that these deaths matter. But when you finally get around to killing off Jorah, what did it do? Like when you finally got around to killing off Theon, what did it do? Like Sansa had to cry for 15 minutes, one could make an argument that Jorah was a piece of straw on the back of the Dany story, but he's just one piece of straw with everything else,
Mance's death didn't mean anything. Now I'm thinking about it too.
Yeah.
Like, everything went
even
on
Mance.
exactly as it would have had he been
What?
alive. So why would
Yeah,
he still
you thought
cross the
that
wall?
Right. And then they started trashing Mance, and granted, I wouldn't put all the blame on the show here, because as much as people claim George R. R. Martin just kills off characters, he doesn't. Okay. In the books, he's killed off one major point of view character, and that's Ned. You know,
I would argue like there's no plot armor in Game of Thrones. Every action has a consequence. You know, Robb betraying Walder Frey, there's consequences to that. You don't get away with that just because you're king in the North, or you know, Ned's son, or you know, one of I guess you could argue the main characters, if not point of view characters. Same with Catelyn.
Yeah. So it's just that when a character dies and there's no real repercussions. Like even when Cersei blew up the Sept,
the Faith had no response to this.
Right. You blew up the freaking Pope and the Vatican together, and nothing. Crickets. So it's I think that's a bit of it. It's not just the shock value of killing off a character. It's the shock value of killing off a character and having no repercussions afterwards. You know, I think that's really the thing.
Number 7 here. I don't feel like I need to go into this too much because it's completely true, and you've argued this several times. Number 7, the characters became less complex and nuanced over time.
Oh yeah, well yeah, of course. Once you're getting off the book material, I mean, what are you gonna do?
That nothing else needs to be said. Number 6,
the only character, and I've complimented this in the past. I'd say the only character that becomes more complicated is Dario.
Oh.
No, I'd say Dario. Well, actually, no, you're right. You're okay. You named another one, Grey Worm. Okay, I'd say Grey Worm and Dario both grew and became more complicated in time, and we're interesting. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you on Grey Worm. Yeah. Okay.
Number 6, the grand finale isn't worth it. I don't even feel like I need to go into this one. That needs no explanation.
Yeah. I mean, which grand finale 1 or grand finale 2, but neither one.
Number 5, I disagree with. Any potential sequels and spin-offs are unnecessary and unwanted. One of the worst things that Game of Thrones finale did was prioritize teases for future sequels and spin-offs instead of wrapping things up properly. The showrunners and HBO were so assured of their flagship series' success that they prematurely planned an expanded universe, but it might be dead on arrival. What? Following the finale...
Yeah, but I don't remember them doing this before the end of Game of Thrones.
They were whispers of
whispers, okay.
Yeah. Following the finale's harsh rejection, prequels like Blood Moon, with a pilot that cost $30 million, and others were axed, which is not really true. The upcoming House of the Dragon, meanwhile, is inspiring more ridicule than hype. Anyone who's actually interested in an expanded Game of Thrones universe will be wasting their time with a rewatch that teases a roadmap that's leading nowhere. See, about this, the best example I can give is Amazing Spider-Man 2, where that guy is walking through the hallway and you can see like the Sinister Seven equipment there, Vulture wings. Like that is what I think of when I see like them trying to do an expanded universe while the movie's going. I don't think Game of Thrones did this.
No, it's not like there was a scene in season 8 where they're like, the thing about Rhaenyra, like no one did that, right?
No
one. No. So that did not happen in the show. Like even if they were planning on stuff, none of it showed up. None of it showed up in season 8. Right? There was nothing about, a Blood Moon prequel or House of the Dragon in season 8 where we're sitting there going, I mean, unless he's thinking that Jon and Dany looking in the caves at the Thedas carved in the wall was like Blood Moon stuff. Or Ned Umber like, crucified on the wall with his like swirly fire was some Blood Moon thing.
Swirly fire.
Or whatever it was,
First off, and in your comment section I've seen it, in my comment section I've seen it. People are saying whenever we do House of the Dragon anything, someone's like, bro, who cares?
It's true.
You came to watch this video and comment on it. Clearly you care on some level.
Yeah. That's the thing, is people there's gonna be this curiosity. Like I admit that like he's not completely wrong that the fandom has been traumatized by season 8, and they have really negative feelings about House of the Dragon coming out. But at the same time, like there's still this massive curiosity. Like, what's it going to be like? What's it going to be like? Like people can't look away. This is like when Attack of the Clones came out, right? Everybody's just like, man, Star Wars is ruined because the Phantom Menace was
sucked,
horrible.
yeah.
And then you know what they did? They went out and they fucking still went to Attack of the Clones and it sucked.
True.
And then they were like, fuck, I've been burned too many times. I'm definitely not going to go see Revenge of the Sith. And then they fucking still went out and went and saw Revenge of the Sith. You know, so I don't know. I don't know if the IP has been destroyed or not.
I don't think so.
We'll find out when House of the Dragon premieres, you know. But it's true that the fandom's in a weird place right now. I'll grant that, right? It's in a weird place.
The fandom is cautious, if anything. It's because we've only had, one series, and this whole expanded universe thing, House of the Dragon will really make or break it. So,
I mean, but I would say there's two things going at once, though. There's two big things in the fandom that are causing weird feelings, and that is one, the end of Game of Thrones, and then two, George's like inability to produce Winds of Winter, and those two pillars of toxicity are like poisoning everything. And we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. I'm saying they're justified. I mean, I'm part of those pillars. I'm like, oh God, But like, there's definitely two things souring the IP.
Number 4, you've already explained this ad nauseum over the past several years. But number 4, the series contradicted everything it set up thematically.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, it was a big anti-war tale about how we shouldn't have spent our time like fighting each other and should have like, united together to fight a common cause. And in the end, like, and how like violence destroys the human soul from the inside out. And in the end, like all of the violence that the main characters like participated in, like didn't do anything to him. Like Sansa was fine, Jon was fine, Arya was fine.
He writes here, when it began, Game of Thrones was basically a high fantasy brought down to a dirty and harsh reality. The knights and lords were far from noble, magic only made a bad situation worse, power was inherently corrupt, and so on. However, what seemed like a deconstruction of medieval society was really an affirmation and defense of it. In the controversial 8th season, power returned to the heroic elite after they executed a few bad actors, including a queen who led the oppressed and laughed at the idea of democracy. Everything Game of Thrones set out to deconstruct wasn't just reconstructed, but fortified by a tone-deaf finale.
I mean, they tried. Like, there's aspects where they're clearly trying. Like, they're trying to claim that, like, Tyrion was this, like, rehabilitated character, that he made all of these mistakes and now he can be a good ruler. But they never really established him as a bad ruler. He kind of says it at the end, like, oh, I thought I was wise and I wasn't. And you're like, well, we really needed more emphasis on that, because throughout the whole series, he was portrayed as the clever guy who like no one listened to, was really the smartest guy in the room, Yeah, it's true though. I don't think that the whatever themes they were going for, which are like war is bad, vengeance bad, like they somehow failed on those like really simple themes. But okay. Yeah.
So, number 3 on this list, I kind of disagree with, simply because it sounds wrong to imply that Thrones can't stand on its own merits, but I digress. Number 3, the series was not as dark or mature as it claimed to be. One of Game of Thrones' selling point was that it was the grown-up answer to idealistic high fantasies like The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Westeros' saga could be read as Martin's deconstruction of such stories, especially since he made his misgivings with J.R.R. Tolkien's epic public. However, Game of Thrones ended up dark, not mature. In truth, Game of Thrones was just The Lord of the Rings with an R rating. Westeros had more blood, profanity, and sex than Middle-earth ever had, but it never went beyond being an edgy fantasy. The series rushing out a jarring, saccharine ending is only more proof of its lack of commitment to its supposed maturity. I disagree with this point from the article mainly because it's kind of an unfair thing to compare the two. Like, even though it's a common comparison that happens all the time, Thrones has enough going for it to stand on its own 2 feet. You know, like other fantasy series kind of rely on The Lord of the Rings to keep fans familiar with like world building, other elements. Because if you've read or seen Lord of the Rings, you kind of, a lot of the new fantasy stuff, you're kind of familiar with what's going on, orcs, elves, all that stuff. But George doesn't really do that. Saying Game of Thrones is an edgy Lord of the Rings is like saying Dune is an edgy Star Trek. Not really.
Here's the problem is that um like A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones are released at different times. And so the fantasy world is in two different places at those two different times. So it is true that when Lord of the Rings, the books, are published, high fantasy has a kind of idealized, like fun, adventurous kind of attitude. And then there is a shift. There is a movement that Game of Thrones is very much part of, but Wheel of Time is part of this movement as well, of moving from like good, clean, high fantasy, swashbuckling adventure fun to like dark, gritty realism, and that Game of Thrones is that dark, gritty realism, and so it's like revolutionary, in 1996. The problem is that Lord of the Rings movies come out after 1996, and they are much darker than Lord of the Rings books. And so you're already on this like transition to dark, that's appearing. So like when Game of Thrones comes out, I would say it's still pretty freaking dark compared to fantasy, but it's part of this like transition. And so it's not really contrasted to. I would say that and Game of Thrones the show and Lord of the Rings the movies are not as different as A Song of Ice and Fire the books is to Lord of the Rings. Does that all make sense?
Yes, it does. And I just don't agree with this point because I don't think any show that came
Yeah.
out back then and even in the 2000s was trying to be edgy. I just think it was trying to be on HBO.
Well, first of all, anything you're going to put on HBO, it comes off like HBO. Like everything on HBO,
That's it.
right?
Exactly. It's
Right. There's got to be tits and violence in every HBO show. So that's going to be
honestly that's kind of where we are in television right now. You're either getting HBO or you're getting CW.
there. Yeah.
And along the way there's some things in between. You know?
That's a perfect example because you're right that CW still has that kind of like adventurous clean kind of like feel to everything,
Where
right?
every character is like a fucking supermodel, and then you do
Yeah.
have some stuff in between, like I'm watching right now, the Halo show,
Hmm.
and unfortunately I am, and the Halo show, or even Netflix's Cowboy Bebop. It's somewhere between
Yeah.
HBO and CW because yes, you have some ass and some
Hmm.
violence. But it's still like a high fly adventure where all the characters are supermodel good looking and the stakes aren't really that high and there's still plot armor there. So it's in the middle. But I think you sum it up perfectly. I think the series was not as dark or mature as it claimed to be. I don't think it claimed to be anything. I just claimed if anything, it claimed to be on HBO. And it fucking
That's the thing, right?
yeah, it's
I mean, that's the thing is it as revolutionary as people think it is? And it's like, I don't know. I mean, I think in some ways it was just lucky. It became the pop cultural thing that everybody decided to focus on, right?
Preston, you have no idea the luck involved in the I don't know if you've read that making of the show book yet, but the luck of everything involved in making season 1, that is lightning in the
Yeah, it
bottle.
was lightning in a bottle. Because
Holy
you're talking about a
shit.
bunch of unknown actors. on that that had a really crappy pilot
With
that
showrunners who like didn't have the
who
best reputation,
right
if at all.
who at all, you know, X-Men Origins Wolverines, right, Wolverine, with a writer who was kind of a wash up, right? You know, before Ice and Fire, like who also did not have the best record, you know.
That is
Um,
true. George R. R. What was besides Beauty and the Beast? What else did he have him involved with? Fail.
I mean, he just so in Hollywood he just did Beauty and the Beast, and he did some episodes of The Twilight Zone and Outer Limits.
Hmm.
He didn't do that much in Hollywood actually, but then before that his writing career had failed. He was this he was this really, you know, up and coming you know, sci-fi writer who won all these awards, and then he put out the Armageddon rag, and it didn't really do that great. It didn't do well at all. Even Fever Dream like was only a lukewarm success, and then Armageddon rag was just bombed, and so he thought his writing career was over, or at least his novel writing career was over. So I mean, you think, you know, he's doing these like kind of shit shows in Hollywood and wild cards, you know, like that's his life. And so it's a good thing you know, A Song of Ice and Fire, like, you know, was became the sleeper hit and then was picked up with Game of Thrones.
Well, I'm going to touch back on what you just said, but number two, we've discussed this briefly with his most recent update, and I guess we can discuss it again briefly, because I feel like we've discussed it ad nauseum. Number two, the series tarnished its source material's legacy and reputation. Before it was adapted into live action, Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire was one of the premier fantasy series in bookstores and libraries. The HBO show's first few seasons validated its quality even more and catapulted it into the public consciousness. But then, its closing seasons dropped the balls, blah 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 blah. Today, Game of Thrones as a whole has been reduced to a cautionary tale and punchline almost nobody wants to mention or even remember. The series'
Hmm.
failures made many viewers and readers question if the source material was any good in the first place, with any excitement for the last two books giving way to disinterest and mockery. Untrue. Any person, almost every single person who watched Game of Thrones watched it with like a friend who read the books, and the
Yeah.
friend and I can guarantee you 9 times out of 10 that one person that a show only fan watched with a book reader fan. The book reader fan always told the show the books are better.
Oh, I mean, look, the books. There's just no doubt that like the books are genius. Like there's nothing like them. There's nothing like them. There's nothing like them in complexity, and storytelling and scope and everything. Like they're, you know, we wouldn't have been able to put out just countless videos for like years and years, like analyzing this shit,
Yeah.
had it not been like the most ambitious thing, you know, that's come out in in decades. You know, like it's um the book's incredible. Now, did the show tarnish the legacy? Well,
No.
it it only tarnished it in the sense that it affected the man, and the man went and tarnished his own legacy by choosing not to finish the books.
110%. I was going to say the
Yeah.
exact same thing. Because, like, first off, with any excitement for the last two books giving way to disinterest and mockery, if anything, the last couple of seasons that sucked are giving people more hope that the books will just be better. And they're more
Yeah.
interested in the unreleased books. And where's the mockery? Once again, every single book reader who watched with a show only fan most likely had this conversation where they said to their show only fan friends, trust me, the books will be better, the books will do the ending justice.
Right.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't like you, and you're right about this. We discussed it in the other video. The only I want Martin to be on the Mount Rushmore of top fantasy writers with Tolkien,
Yeah.
and Frank Herbert and all that. I just don't think he's going to be on there because I don't think he wants to finish. I don't think he wants anything to do with Ice and Fire as much as he does, you know, doing everything he's ever wanted to do by being a famous book guy, you know, which
Yeah.
is doing everything but finish the books.
Yeah. I mean, he doesn't he doesn't think he's as mortal as he is. He thinks he can somehow do all of this. He can't. Yeah, it's a sad thing, but it's like I can't blame I don't blame Game of Thrones for it. And I don't blame these producers and everything for it. It's sort of like, let's say a really, really good person, and then somebody happens to give them $1 million, and then they take that $1 million and they become a drug addict and kill themselves, right? Like, is the person that gave the $1 million to them to blame?
No.
Like, no, it's just that person didn't know how to handle $1 million. Well, George R. R. Martin doesn't know how to handle fame and massive wealth and all of these things. He doesn't know how to handle it. And it's destroyed him as a writer. But and I don't mean it's destroyed his abilities, because I think his abilities are still there. It's destroyed him as a writer in the sense that he's not producing anything.
Hey, look, man. The guy, if anything, he hasn't really put out any books besides Fire and Blood. But even then, it seems like most of what's happening is Hollywood and everybody else is paying him to put his name on other products, so those products can sell. He's becoming the DJ Khaled of the writers' world.
Here's the irony. I'm gonna find, this might be the clip that you're gonna pull out for previews. Okay. George R. R. Martin, his life has proved the message of his own work, that power corrupts.
Stop it. Maybe a tad.
Maybe a tad.
Like I said in the previous video where we discussed this, I can't blame him. I really can't, because
and that's
everybody
the thing,
wants that.
If we were in the same situation, would we be able to resist? Would we be able to be on that deadline?
Would you resist? Yes, you would, because you have a wife and a child.
Yeah.
No. I would drown in the coke and the hookers. I would I would go down in the blaze of glory.
You'd be finding Santa Fe's finest, or what?
Preston, you are a stand-up. You're a stand-up guy of morally good conscience. Me, no, I'm out of my mind, and you know this very well. You know this very well.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay.
I know our video is going really long, but I would say that the difference, I would say that I would not be actually so negative about you, because you're a very social person, and you are tapped into and care about like what other people around you, the community, says. And so I think like you'd hear these messages, like say Carmine produced the greatest fantasy series ever. You'd come to me and you'd be like, fuck, all these motherfuckers are saying I'm not finishing this goddamn book. I better finish this fucking book just to show those motherfuckers. Like, that's how you would handle it. Like, knowing you.
You know me well. Holy
you'd be so angry that people were talking shit about you, that you would finish the book to spite those mototherfuckers.
Yeah, he's right. I'm a very petty asshole. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. I am.
All right, continue on.
So, number one, this is something we've complained about several times, and everybody else has complained about several times as well, and it has almost nothing to do with the show, but what the show has become in the zeitgeist of like cultural importance or whatever. Number one, the series arguably did more harm than good to the fantasy genre. By no fault of its own, Game of Thrones kickstarted an edgy trend that's still being chased today in shows like Vikings and The Witcher. But its failure inflicted worse damage. When it crashed and burned, interest in and respect for fantasy plummeted. Viewers simply weren't ready to give another medieval epic a shot in fear of reliving Westeros' disappointment. Cases in point, The Wheel of Time launched under the radar, and Game of Thrones' legacy is one of the many reasons behind the doubt Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power is facing. Revisiting HBO's dark fantasy today only makes its negative ramifications of genre more pronounced, blah blah. So, here's the thing. We've complained about this before as well. Where every fucking network that comes out with anything fantasy, you know for a fact that they want to be the next Game of Thrones. There's a power vacuum was left in Thrones' finale, and there is some truth to that. I don't know if Bill Maher has this thing he loves to say where he goes, "I don't know it for a fact, but I know it's true." And I'm going
Yeah.
to echo that. I don't know for a fact, but I know it's true that in the writer's room for The Witcher and Wheel of Time, these assholes were trying to plot on how to be the next Game of Thrones and what
Oh,
to do
absolutely.
to make it a reality. So yes, I agree with number one that Game of Thrones kind of did harm to like many fantasy shows now and in the future because everybody wants to top
Mhm.
Thrones' legacy.
All of this is very true, but how can this is the case with all success. Like all success is you know, you're going to have people trying to mimic it and mimic it badly and take advantage of it, you know? It's like those straight to video sequels that come out after, a disaster movie comes out, it's like, oh, after, um, uh, Armageddon comes out, you're going to have some sort of straight to video thing called like, Meteor, and it's just like a horrible movie that's just trying to capitalize on the success of something big. Um, so, I mean, you're always just going to have that crap that tries to mimic it. Now, um, is it bad for fantasy? No, I don't think it's bad for fantasy at all. If anything, like, uh, more people are now interested in fantasy. People are going to be producing more fantasy, and anytime you just have more people reading and more people producing, you're going to get a lot more crap, but you're also going to get a lot more really great hits. So that's just going to be the case. Like there's going to be some really great fantasy out there. There's going to be, there all of these people are going to be into writing, and they're going to start producing similar things, and they're not going to be in the same sort of CW vein of fantasy, that we're gonna have some really interesting stuff in the future, So
Here's where I disagree. I think fans of The Wheel of Time and fans of The Witcher would disagree with you.
mm,
Specifically, Wheel of Time. I have this one guy on my Discord. He was telling because he's read the Wheel of Time books eons ago, and he
yeah,
was telling me how the Wheel of Time does have politics in it, but in later on books, the first few
yeah,
books does have it, but not as much as the show
yeah.
did.
Wheel of Time is weird because, like I say, Wheel of Time transitions the high fantasy um, time period from going from Lord of the Rings to Song of Ice and Fire. It's half classic high fantasy, half gritty high fantasy.
Right. But I think the problem that I'm starting to see now, especially with Wheel of Time, not especially, I'm sorry, especially with Witcher and Halo and Cowboy Bebop and a lot of these
Mm.
other shows, is that the way Game of Thrones influenced these other shows, and not for the better, was that here you have Dave and Dan, two virtual unknowns who came in. Yeah, they adapted it, but they also injected their own stuff in there too. Now you have
Mm.
all these other fucking writers who they can't get their own show from networks, but instead they borrow other franchises and adapt those and try to inject their own bullshit in there to try to be the next either Dave and Dan or and try to make their show the next Game of Thrones so they can be kind of like Dave and Dan from the earlier couple of seasons, right? Like for example, the Halo shit. It's not following the games. The writers are doing
Mm.
their own fucking thing.
Oh my. Okay.
And same with Cowboy Bebop and The Witcher as well to some extent. Like those
Yeah.
showrunners
I
and
mean,
writers kind of doing their own thing, and I don't.
Wheel of Time didn't have that much injected. It was more about what was cut. But
Yeah,
people the reception of Wheel of Time has been kind of, yeah, it was pretty good. It wasn't great. It was okay. That's kind of the reception. Like no one says that Wheel of Time was bad, but no one says Wheel of Time was like the best thing. It's
it was
just kind
just
of,
whatever, just
it was
mediocre.
no, I would say that they would say it was, from what I've heard, some people say it's mediocre, some people say slightly better than mediocre. Um, but like no, but nobody is a huge hater and no one is a huge lover of the Wheel of
Hmm.
Time series. I watched it and I would agree with that. I would say, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. But I would never say it's like must see, like, Game of Thrones, like, I'm just like, oh, mom, you need to watch this. And my mom loved it, like, I would never say, mom, you've got to watch Wheel of Time. Like, like, That's the thing, right? Are you going to recommend it? When I say to people like, like when I say like Carmine, have you watched Russian Doll?
I actually, it's on my list. It's
Oh my God, it's
a
so
long
fucking
list.
good. Season 2 is coming out. Oh man,
That's why I said that. Yeah, it's on my list.
Russian Doll is so fucking good, and I would always recommend it. But or The Leftovers. I would always say like, no, The Leftovers is fucking incredible. But am I gonna say like, oh, you must see Wheel of Time? Yeah, it's fine.
Say what you will about Dave and Dan, they did, even though they adapted Game of Thrones from the books fairly well, they also made it their own.
Mm,
And like, sure, like these showrunners for like The Witcher and Halo and all that stuff, they want to make a name for themselves,
yeah.
and they had an idea for their own show, but they weren't given like carte blanche to make that show on those networks. And now they're living out their own ideas with borrowed characters from other franchises. And
The
how
fact that people can say like, oh, they're trying to make the show look like Game of Thrones is actually a big compliment to D&D. Like
it is.
they did create a visual signature on screen that was unique that other people are trying to mimic, you know?
Well,
So,
well, this is what I'm saying. Like Game of Thrones, in a sense, is because this guy is saying that people aren't giving new medieval shows a shot. I think that's bullshit. I think
mm,
people are more willing to give newer medieval shows a shot because fans are looking for the next Game of Thrones.
they
the
are.
The problem is that showrunners and writers are trying to not only mimic Game of Thrones, but they're doing it very poorly. And uh, that's the problem I'm having, is that ultimately stop trying to be Game of Thrones. Be whatever show you're trying
Right.
to make. Don't copy Thrones. Don't try to do what they did. Don't try to, mimic Dave and Dan. Just do what you need to do to write and tell a good story, the best of your ability. That's it. You don't need to copy. Wheel of Time, just be Wheel of Time. Don't be Thrones with like magic and shit. Witcher, don't be Thrones with like monsters and Geralt and sorcerers and shit. Just be Witcher. But they're not going to do that because they want to. When networks and showrunners and writers want to mimic Game of Thrones, I don't think they want to mimic the story and the story beats. I think they want to mimic the success. Because say
Oh
what you will
yeah.
about the final season, that final season was abysmal in ratings, but the viewership, 30 million viewers an episode for the last season, that's like a Super Bowl every week.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're right. Is they think that that it's like an equation that if I mimic 4 and I mimic plus and I mimic 6, I'm gonna get the result of 10, right? And so that's what they're doing. They're putting inputs in and thinking that because they want that input out, they want the huge success. So they're like, well, what were the inputs into Game of Thrones? And they're like, well, okay, it was a fantasy story, and it was an established book series
This
that
is the writer's room right here,
yeah,
boys. This is the
that
writer's room.
fantasy it was an established book series that fantasy fans really loved. Okay, and then it was really dark, and there were some tits and dragons, and
Quick, write that down.
yeah.
Tits, dragons.
Tits
Right.
Dragons. So okay, so it's dark, established book series that fantasy fans love, and then if we can do that, then it's going to be massive success. Uh, well, but like I say, but like you said before, it's the lightning in a bottle. Like there's
Yeah.
that unnamed unique element that we can't explain that makes something come together and be special, you know? And I don't know how, we don't know how to create that. So,
I feel so bad for Lord of the Rings. I hope to God they try to mimic the success of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings instead of this bullshit. Like, no, just
people are, right now, the expectations are so low. All I see is stuff trashing Lord of the Rings. And so,
well,
based
no,
on nothing,
you're
like,
gonna see people trashing Lord of the Rings from the usual suspects, and they're trashing it for all the wrong reasons.
right.
Like there was a guy who was trashing the trailer for Miss Marvel, and like, bro, even I have like the cadence to know that like Miss Marvel was not made for me. Like, Miss Marvel was not made. Like, yeah, the only thing I had,
Yeah.
because you said this, you're like, we should cover Miss Marvel. You have so much in common with her. You're both immigrants and from Jersey. Yeah, Preston, that's where it ends. I have nothing else to cover. This show clearly wasn't made for me, and that's fine. Like, just because it wasn't made for me doesn't mean I'm gonna like rip it apart. But these assholes
It's
are
true.
just ripping it apart.
I mean, it's true that like Bridgerton isn't made for me, but clearly it's made for somebody, and it's a huge fucking success. You know,
Right.
like it's tapped into something. In fact, I would say like right now, Bridgerton is the closest to Game of Thrones
Oh,
that's out. No. I'm being completely serious, right? It's an established book series, right? There's a lot of like politics and intrigue. That there's a lot of sex, not much violence. Like it's kind of a must see for so many people. There people talk about it. It's in the zeitgeist. Like it's probably the closest thing to Game of Thrones right now, even though it's very, very different from Game of Thrones, right? So, but yeah, if I were gonna like take this, if you're in the SNL writing room and you're like, oh God, we need a pop culture thing to do a skit on, what would you do a skit on? I would choose Bridgerton. Like that's the thing right now.
yeah. I'll take your word for it. I haven't seen Bridgerton. I'll take your word. That's the one where like it's the court of like Victoria, England, whatever. I'm butchering it, and they have like Asians.
It's Victorian. It's Victorian England, and it's mostly about men and women, a high class men and women like pairing off and finding husbands and wives for each other in this society, this high society, and all of the characters. It happens to be a overly diverse situation relative to actual history.
You told me about this. You told me about this a while ago, where you're like,
yeah,
no, the English court here did not have like Asians and yeah,
no, yeah, which is fine, It doesn't. It's a TV show. I don't care, but like it's interesting. But whatever they've done. And like I say, it's kind of lightning in a bottle. Like whatever they've done, it's working. It's working because people are watching and people are talking. And I've seen bits and pieces of Bridgerton season 1 and season 2 just over the shoulder of my wife, and it's put the acting's fine. It's put together really well. So I can't. That's you put all those things together, like a compelling story with good acting and characters and everything. It's it's not dark. It's not Game of Thrones, and yet it's succeeded in capturing that sort of place in society.
There you go.
Bridgerton.
Yeah, no, that's all I have here for this article. Some of them I agree with, some of them I don't. But
no, whether we agreed or not, it was good thoughts to think about. Even when they're wrong, it was an interesting question to examine. So kudos to the author.
Preston, you mind if we wrap it up here?
Sure.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us on this discussion piece. We will see you all next time. Have a good one.